be aware of a recent trend in Australian literature towards outback noir, scary crime novels set in small Australian towns where there's a troubled detective with dark secrets of their own who is often sent back to the town that they came from, which is perhaps ravaged by drought, and the townspeople are all very suspicious, and there's a dead body left out in the sun, and blah, 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 blah. I wrote one of these books myself. It was called Kill Your Brother. I love a good bandwagon to jump on. But for my money, one of the most interesting books in this genre was one called The Night Whistler by Greg Woodland, which is about a serial killer stalking victims in a small Australian town, fictitious, called Moorabool. The twist on the genre that Greg Woodland took was that he set this book in the summer of 1966, which really added an extra air of menace and isolation and all the things which are already present in Australia, like corruption, racism, sexism. They're all ramped up to the nth degree when you set something in 1966. And now Greg Woodland has followed up The Night Whistler with a new book called The Carnival is Over, which I liked even more. So The Carnival is Over is set a little later. It's in 1971, but has most of the same characters. One of them is a 17-year-old kid named Hal who's on a good behaviour bond after stealing a car, and he gets stuck working in the meat packing room of an abattoir. And then when his boss, no, wait, that's too close to being a spoiler. So there's someone who is found dead in a car. There's a troubled alcoholic detective named Mick Goodnow, which is confusingly spelt good enough, who ends up investigating, but the death is very, very quickly ruled a suicide. Too quickly, perhaps. And what I liked about The Carnival is Over compared to The Night Whistler is that because The Night Whistler is a serial killer thriller, those stories for me always are a little bit formulaic. Like, one of the most... In a crime novel, there's almost always a murder or several murders, but the most interesting thing for me about the murders is that there's always a motive, and the motive is always different. But that's not true in serial killer thrillers, because for serial killers, the motive is always the same, i.e. there is no motive, they're just arranged. So on the one hand, that's part of what's supposed to be scary about serial killer fiction, the fact that there is no motive. They might kill you for no reason. But that's scary the first time you read it. It's not so scary the 5th or 10th or 20th time. But The Carnival is Over has a really interesting conspiracy at the heart of it that has many more layers that I found much more entertaining. The other thing that's cool about it is that because it's set in 1971, this isn't just a standard crime novel transposed over that year to give it a bit of flavour. Instead, it's the sort of crime that would only work in that time period. And, there's checkbooks. Like, one of the plot twists involves a checkbook. So a young person reading this might actually need to talk to someone who's a bit older, old enough to remember what checkbooks were and kind of have that explained to them, and how the banking system worked. And oh god, that doesn't make it sound very exciting, does it? But it really is. The other things that I liked about it, so firstly, it's written with this sort of really lean, masculine prose. I don't know if masculine is the best word to use there, but if you read it, you'll understand what I mean. Greg Woodland is a screenwriter, and it shows. The dialogue is really sort of snappy and feels very authentic for that time. In fact, there's a tendency when we're writing books or reading books set in the past to kind of have a hero who has modern day sensibilities being surrounded by very backward people. And those books, it feels like they exist just so as the contemporary reader can pat themselves on the back and go like, wow, we are so much more enlightened now. I'm a good person. And then kind of never feel any obligation to improve. That might be the subject of another video. But the point is that the heroes and the villains in this book all feel like they are authentically of their time. And it's not just the way that they talk, it's the way that they see the world. It's also cool that, unlike a lot of Outback Noir, Greg Woodland has chosen to include Indigenous characters in the book. I've found, maybe I haven't read widely enough to make this claim, but the Outback Noir genre tends to kind of exclude Indigenous people and Indigenous characters from the regional towns. They all... anyway, so Greg Woodland hasn't done that. He's done a really good job of being inclusive in all sorts of ways and not kind of shying away from the discrimination that existed at that time, but nor has he kind of exaggerated it, or, well, I wasn't alive in 1971. I don't know how authentic this is. All I know is that it felt utterly real. It's not a perfect book, or perhaps not a perfect book for this particular reader. There was a bit of sexual violence towards the end that I thought might have been unnecessary, and it is quite a slow burn. This is a book that builds and builds and builds, but it does so gradually, and there were definitely moments when slow burn started to feel like a standstill. But my bedside table is just covered with books like this, with the bookmark halfway through, where I started out and went, wow, this is cool, there's these characters, there's a meatpacking plant, there's some kind of conspiracy going on, and then I just lost interest for whatever reason and never got back to it. That was not the case with this one. The heroes, the villains, the environment, they kept me turning the pages all the way to the final page. So that's The Carnival is Over by Greg Woodland. Hope you like it as much as I did. I am Jack Heath, author of Kill Your Brother. Leave a comment if you've read the book and want to tell me what you think, or any suggestions for other books I might read in the future. I'm interested in having a chat with you about Framed by John N. Green, which is about art theft being investigated by a descendant of Vincent van Gogh, a fictitious descendant, so that was really cool. And also, I recently read Falling by T.J. Newman, which reminded me a little bit of The Chain by Adrian McKinty, and I'd love to do a video that does a kind of compare and contrast between those two, because on the surface they're completely different, and then underneath they're very similar, and then underneath that they're completely different again. So if that doesn't sound too pretentious and academic for you, I'd love to talk to you about that as well. So let me know in the comments what you think about all that. Thanks for having me in your computer, phone, however it is you're watching this, and I am going to stop the video before I screw up like the last 5 times I attempted to record this video and make it unwatchable somehow.